Mary Forgues is a violent crime survivor, Second Amendment advocate, marketing mercenary, and a mom of 2 teenagers. All the accolades for me. She is on an unwavering journey to protect and preserve our constitutional rights, and Mary is our next guest, up right after this.
But first, if you own a gun in California, you should have an attorney that specializes in California gun laws on your speed dial. Because if you ever have legal matters that involve firearms, you need California's firearm lawyer, John Dillon, especially if you have questions about red flag laws, gun registration, gun transportation, or maybe you just need to know that your guns are California compliant. Our trusted firearms attorney is John Dillon. John Dillon specializes in California gun laws. Put his number on your phone right now, 760-642-7150. That's John Dillon, California firearms lawyer, 760-642-7150. Can you imagine police officer pulls you over? Excuse me, can see your driver's license and insurance. Hold on a minute. 760. Could you talk to my lawyer? I wonder if he talked to him.
He might.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Who's our guest?
We have Mary. Mary, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Hi, Mary. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Mary, you're the Connecticut representative for the DC Project, but can you give us an introduction to our audience and tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure. So I actually do a lot. I've been the state director for Connecticut for the DC Project for a little over a year now, but I also have been in firearm training since 2017. Previously more so as like on a marketing level rather than on an instruction level. And after 2019, it became more of on an instruction level. And additionally, I am a 911 emergency dispatcher. So I dispatch police, fire, and medical emergencies here in Connecticut. And I have a small business that is a marketing company. I am a ammunition scenario instructor at WAFT down in West Orlando, Florida. And I am a featured writer for Armed Lifestyle magazine.
So what don't you do, Mary? That seems like a better question here.
I do a lot. And on top of all that, I also have 2 teenagers. So
I can't imagine raising 2 teenagers like that right now.
No, it's, yeah, I mean, within the mix of everything, I'm going to say that's probably the hardest job is raising teenagers.
I can imagine that.
They keep you pretty busy. So, Mary, you mentioned it seems like going back in history as far as 2017. I'm curious, back in your youth, did you have any exposure to firearms growing up, or was this more of a recent exposure that you've had?
I mean, my grandfather had a revolver when we were growing up, so I was always around a firearm, not so much where I handled one. When my daughter was 2, so in 2008, I had visited with my mother and my stepfather out in Kansas where they had resided, and they had firearms, and I ended up shooting their firearm. You know, they taught me basically my introduction to firearms, like how to handle it and what I'm aiming at, you know? So like it was like the very, very basic fundamentals
right.
of firearms was in 2008. And then about a decade ago, I ended up getting my permit as a single mother. I was like, you know, I at least have to have the tools available to me if I do need to protect my kids and myself.
So, Mary, what made you dive into the deep end then with firearms? Because it seems like you do a lot with the firearms industry now. So what made you go that route?
So I had my permit, and then in 2019, November 2019, I was attacked in my home, and I'm a survivor of a violent attack, and I had to pull my firearm in that incident. And since then, I became more of an advocate of the education behind firearms, because at the time, I did have my permit and I did own a gun, but I honestly didn't know much other than I didn't know much of what I was doing other than aiming my gun at somebody to make sure that my life was preserved. So I didn't have any additional training, even like the follow-up of an incident, like how to, when I call the police, how to, inform them on this situation. And I dove into it. And then in 2021, I met with Holly Sullivan from Connecticut. She's the president of the CCDL, and she introduced me to the DC Project. And then I met Diana Muller, and it's been a rabbit hole ever since then. So
You bring up a really great, important point, because I think a lot of the public in general is probably about the same place that you were. They think that if they are in a legitimate self-defense situation, they defend their life, they think they're going to be okay. But you bring up a very valid point that it's important to know those follow-up points, what to do, what to say, because it's not so much as easy as you may think, just because it was a legitimate defense, that you're going to necessarily be okay. You have to know the right way to proceed, and those things are important to know. And that training is important.
correct. It's, how to handle that situation in those moments, but also how to communicate with officers. And then even like the aftermath a few months after, like that psychological aspect of processing what you went through and how to prevent it from happening again. You analyze how you got into that situation and what you could have done differently. So there's a lot that comes with it. It's that like the thought process and the education behind it, it doesn't live and die within that moment. It continues for, months, years later, where you're trying to figure it out and then also help other people figure it out.
So, Mary, I know that your story, there's a video up on the DC Project website. I did watch it. And I know that others want to see your story as well. Can you kind of share with us where they can find that story if they want to just kind of hear a little bit more background? Because I want to kind of go more into the now, but if they want to hear more of that history, I'd love for you to share where they can find that.
Sure. They could find it at the DC Project, so it's actually dcproject.info. And we also have a docuseries that's being launched this upcoming week. The DC Project's being featured, but it was produced by Jeff Hayes Films. And the DC Project will be sending out emails and putting up updates on their social media as that docuseries is released. And my story is included within that docuseries.
Perfect. So by way of additional training that you were referencing, what do you think is a critical next step? People, they get their fundamentals, they learn how to aim, they learn how to stand, they learn how to load a gun. What would you recommend as a self-defender? Where do we go next with our training? What should be our next steps that we look for?
The next step that we're looking for is, I would say, the medical aspect of it too, any type of stop the bleed classes or the mental aspect of it, how to help somebody else that's going through that type of situation or has gone through it. It's really the communication, I'm going to say. It's not always just the wasting ammo down range on a target. It's also, again, how not to even become a target in the first place, how not to be in that situation. So that's what I would say is the continued education. It's not only just wasting ammo, but I would say, like in my situation, the use of low light and barricade training, that would have been a lot more valuable in my incident because it was in my house, it was at nighttime. So again, rather than showing up at the range, buying a box of ammo and going through it, I would say seek training from people that have that, that they've either experienced it. I wouldn't say only military and law enforcement, but seeking that additional training.
Okay, absolutely.
That's what we call purposeful training, right? Like going to the range with an intent on, hey, this is what I want to practice today.
Correct, exactly.
What do you think? What's a major difference that you've noticed between male and female students when it comes to firearms?
Hitting the target.
By the way, all three women just started laughing.
Women listen?
Yeah, that makes me a little
concerned. You sure you want to ask that question, Mike?
Dave and I went, yeah, that's a really good question, and all three women started laughing. So, all right, go for it. Unload.
I would say for starters, so when I got my very first gun, it was a Glock 43. I walked into the gun store, and this was before my incident. I walked into the gun store, and the gentleman that works there's actually two of them. They said, "This is the gun that you want," and I was like, "Oh, okay." They just said that this is automatically, this is what I'm going to want, which it was a great firearm, and it saved my life. But they just assumed what was going to fit me rather than saying let's test drive a few things and what are you comfortable with and, hold this firearm. And so I would say that's a little bit different, is where I feel like women are expected that, you have to fit kind of like a certain mold or expectation within the industry. And then additionally, as far as our clients showing up for training, guys show up, they're in like their cargo pants or plate carriers, they're completely geared out, and women show up coming from like, they work at banks or they're teachers, they show up in like their regular attire, they're becoming business casual, and they're like, hey, this is my gun and I carry off body, or this is how I carry, and how can I be better with it? Guys, they're more they're pushing it on a tactical level, I'd say.
I go back and forth with I sometimes wonder if people go a little too far, or, on the whole, you got to get the right gun for your hand or whatever.
It's a big deal, though, Mike.
It is, but it feels to me, I go back and forth between it's a big deal, get it right, try 15 guns, blah, 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 blah. Good. And the other side is, I think anybody can use any gun, like any issue. Hands are so similar to each other, and guns are so similar to each other. Almost any issue can be worked through with training. I don't think people train enough, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think like, well, gee, I don't like a Glock because of this, or I don't like a SIG because of that, or I don't like a shield because of this. My bet is that whatever they don't like can be trained through.
But Mike, you and I are completely different. Look at our hands. My hands are a little bit smaller than yours, sir. And when we talk about females and how we're built differently, right? Like there's some females out there that have hands half the size of mine, right? 'Cause I'm a tall girl, and you know that. So being able to grip something properly and to actually get that good grip, that's a big deal for a lot of women.
So you know why Mike can say that, though? Because he's a man with big, strong man hands. Man hands can do that.
Right.
Women, small hands that don't have the grip strength of a man. There's other factors other than, they're to a point, absolutely true. Training to a point, you can make modifications, you can adjust your grip. But if you're talking about making an investment, if it's something you already have, adapt and make it work. But if you're looking to buy, you might as well buy something that fits you. But hand size isn't the only thing to consider too.
Think of arthritis too. Like I worked with a woman this morning that she had really, really bad arthritis, so she couldn't really grip the gun.
Well, I think the job that the gun's is being bought for I think it's a bigger deal than hand size even. But
absolutely.
Okay, so we got one more segment with you, Mary. I want to talk to you about a few things and get real specific on some things. So can't tell you how much I appreciate you calling in and being with us today. So if you can hang with us while we go to a commercial and come right back.
Orange County Gun Owners is dedicated to preserving and restoring Orange County's self-defense rights. And if you live in Orange County and want to help defend and restore the Second Amendment, you need to join ocgunowners.com/join. Orange County Gun Owners is the Do Something organization to restore and defend the Second Amendment. Volunteer at a shooting social, at a gun shop and tabletop, and help more pro-gun local officials get elected. Save the date. Orange County Gun Prom is May 20th. Become a member today at ocgunowners.com/join.
Mary, thanks so much for being with us. This month is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and Desi, with our women's program, has a ton of events lined up that we're going to talk to her about a little bit later. And you were talking, Mary. You said that one of the things that got you more involved was an incident, something that happened, an attack, that you were attacked, I believe, in your home, right?
It was in my home. It was on like I said, November 2019 is Friday night, 9:00 at night, and I was home alone. So it was the place I was supposed to feel the safest. That's where I got attacked.
And I wanted to, so on a macro level, kind of, from 30,000 feet, it got you more involved. It got you more dedicated to teaching others, a little deeper into the subject of firearms and that sort of thing, which I think is awesome. I can't tell you how much we appreciate all the hard work that you do. But I'm curious, what kind of impact and what kind of changes have you experienced and seen in yourself on more of a day-to-day basis, being attacked in the place where you're supposed to feel most safe?
I'm going to say I constantly lock my doors. You know that the house was broken into. I now have 2 locks on both entry spots in my house. And then I say on the day-to-day, I'm making sure that I'm having that dialogue going with other women gun owners that aren't necessarily, conservatives or Republicans, but anybody in any type of, with any political affiliation or no political affiliation. I'm having that dialogue on a daily basis of helping other women get involved with, as far as sharing their testimony, reaching out to representatives, even if it's just meeting with them, at the range and just doing one-on-one. But I'm just trying to help other people with the resources that I have, really, the resources that have become available to me in the past few years. That's how I'm applying it on a daily basis.
How was it navigating the aftermath?
At what aspect, like mentally or?
All the above. Really, honestly, I think I'm most curious about mentally. What was it like trying to navigate that? But also, if you could just kind of touch on the legalities and the logistics of everything after. But primarily, I'm really curious how you were able to get past it, or was it not that hard? Was it what kind of work did you have to do to get past that mentally? Because that's huge.
So I'm going to say, mentally, in the beginning, the first couple of weeks, it felt more of like a shock. And I don't think I actually fully processed it. And again, so this is end of 2019. I talked about it, but I didn't have a lot of emotional reaction to it and say like, holy crap, this happened to me, until March of 2020 when COVID hit. And I was in the restaurant industry at the time, and I was laid off from COVID, and about a week being home alone, with my kids, obviously, but having those days off where I actually started to process it. I was like, I really need to actually talk to a therapist and process what happened here, because not that I was ignoring it, but I also was working, 2 full-time jobs and raising my kids. I went into more like a survivor mode on that aspect, where I didn't allow myself to dive into it much, as far as on a recovery level, until a few months after it happened.
I would just imagine, like, it would not be unusual or surprising if, I mean, this is probably something you think about all the time still. I mean, from maybe like when you're just turning a corner, inside your house, or when you're outside your house, or I would imagine, there are times I think, okay, I got to go run a quick errand. I got to go pick up a gallon of milk or whatever at the store. I don't have my gun on me, whatever. I'm just going to go. And I think to myself, no, you really should. Well, what if this is blah, blah, blah. I'll bet you that conversation in your head is far more serious and dire. I would guess that when you leave the house, that there's no way you're leaving without protection. Correct.
And so if I'm not leaving, I'll leave my house at least with a gun. And if I can't carry my gun with me wherever I'm going, because I live in Connecticut, I'll at least have a knife on me, which I've never carried a knife before until after this incident. So that was a whole new, addition to accessories to my daily life, but also for protection purposes, was I started carrying a knife on me. I also realized, at least once a day in the beginning, and then every other day, I was looking for this guy's obituary to see if he had died, because he's actually a drug addict and an alcoholic, and he was in and out of programs. So even after this incident, because there's an ongoing court case, I would constantly find myself Googling to see if he was even still alive. So that it took up my daily life, whereas it became a routine. I wanted to see where he was at, because I thought he could come out at any time again, even though it wasn't expected the first time. He could come out of nowhere again and attack me.
Is that a real fear, or is that a?
It was, and he actually ended up passing away April 2021. So it kind of died since then. When he died, that fear died. But I was having nightmares about it, and they were really demented nightmares up until he passed away.
Wow.
So.
And did all that, was it pointed specifically at him, or do you find yourself looking at humanity differently? You know what I mean? Do you look at strangers
Absolutely.
differently?
Absolutely looking at humanity differently, because previously I was more involved. There's an organization called 22 Kill, and it's focused on helping veterans that are struggling with certain things. And this person was a veteran that was struggling with substance abuse. And I, unfortunately, really, really strong unfortunate, was I stepped back from helping people after this incident. And previously I was a huge advocate, because, my brother had gone through some things after getting out of the Marine Corps, and that was where my advocacy really stayed previous to this incident. And then after this, I was like, I don't want to help anybody anymore because it makes me vulnerable.
And Mary, based off of what you experienced, what can our listeners or should our listeners take away from your story?
I would say take those preventative courses if it's an option where you live, is just take courses of how to read people as far as body language or how to handle, I would say take like a mental health advocate type of course or a crisis first aid course where you're able to apply verbal judo and communicate with somebody that's in a crisis situation, because a lot of times people that are attacked, they're attacked by somebody that is obviously going through a mental crisis. And if you're able to have that verbal judo and at least create a distance from that person, from your attacker, then you have a lot more opportunity to not have to go through the aftermath of a crisis. So I would say before focusing just on the firearms and the training, take a verbal judo type of course.
I think that's a great takeaway. Is there a part of you that looks back and thinks, wow, I got through this, I survived it, I made myself better, better prepared, more knowledgeable because of it? Is there a part of you that is proud of yourself?
Of course, there's the majority of me is proud of myself. Definitely, because in my situation, I say when I'm telling my story, when you go on to dcproject.info, but in my incident, I'm being attacked and I'm thinking, I'm going to be left for dead. And then my proudest part of my attack was defending my daughter more than defending myself. Jeez. So I think that's where I take the most pride in my traumatic incident, was that I saved my kid's life.
So part of DC Project is you talk to politicians, you talk to elected officials, specifically in DC. When you talk to politicians or elected officials that aren't on your side, they aren't really strong on Second Amendment issues, and you tell them your story, how do they react?
It's hit or miss. Just a few months ago, I'm going to say about 2 months ago, I actually testified at the Capitol here in Connecticut, so up at Hartford. And it wasn't a politician, but it was somebody he's the founder of an organization called Connecticut Against Gun Violence, so CPAGV. And similar to like the Moms Demand Action with the red shirts, except he has the orange shirts. So he tried to use me as an example for himself, saying that, if I had my gun locked up right next to my bed, then I would have not have been in such a traumatic incident.
What?
But,
wait. Explain that to me. What's his rationale?
So his thing was that, because obviously he's pushing for safe storage laws. So he said, if she had her gun locked up next to her bed, she still would have been safe because it would have been right next to her bed. But I said, you don't get to choose where you get to attack, where you're going to get attacked. So if I had gotten attacked in my kitchen, I still need to be my gun still needs to be quickly accessible. So there's been arguments with that. There's been, this past September, I went down and I shared my story with Blumenthal's office down in D.C. Blumenthal's office actually entertained our conversation. They invited us to that table for that discussion and to talk about the Second Amendment. So it was a lot more welcoming, which I was surprised with. But Chris Murphy's office, you walk into his office and they have zero interest at all. It doesn't matter if you're, that one of those 2 million lives that saved your life with a firearm that year. Doesn't matter what statistic you fall under. If you don't fall under their statistic, that fits their narrative, really. So they had no interest in even having that conversation with me.
Wow. Were they rude about it or polite about it? Or I'm just curious.
They were pretty rude about it. They
Jerks.
Murphy's office completely shut me down.
Wow.
They wouldn't even make eye contact. They were like, we entertained the conversation with you because, that's kind of our job here. But at the same time, we don't have any interest in talking about it. So they're very much strong on gun storage laws.
I don't know this, but I'll bet you Murphy was real vocal with the whole, Me Too and Believe Women, and when all that happened, I'll bet you everybody in his office was very supportive. And here you have an empowered woman who was a victim, and did something about it and was able to defend herself. And they won't even listen to you, and in fact, rude. I don't know where if they were vocal on it or not, but I'm willing to bet they probably were. What a bunch of
no, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, when you walk into Chris Murphy's office, the very unfortunate thing before that conversation even starts is that his walls are painted green for Sandy Hook. He has the memorials up for Sandy Hook and everything. So he already has his mindset, and his staffers already have their mindset of as far as the Second Amendment. So it's really hard to have that conversation with them because they already have their mindset up or made up.
Well, Mary, thank you so much for talking to us. Is there a website you want to promote, or where should people learn more?
Sure. So on a political level, if you want to get involved with just sharing your story, providing testimony, that would be dcproject.info. And then if you're looking at doing any type of scenario training with myself and my coworkers, that would be WOFT.com, which is WOF like in Frank T.com.
Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. If you're watching mainstream media, you're not getting the truth about guns. Gun Owners Radio is the easiest way to stay on top of the Second Amendment fight, the fight for your self-defense rights. You can watch our live stream on YouTube every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, or if you're in San Diego, AM 1170, FM 96.1, The Answer. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Gun Owners Radio and you'll find our show. Like and subscribe to help defend and restore the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.